Garland Nixon, talk show host and political analyst, who joins us again now. Garland, welcome back. I'd have you on every week if I could. You are such a popular guest and such a wise one. So I want to ask right up front about Julian Assange. He might be on the plane to you this week, this very week. He might be from the court to the airport and out of here. What's going to happen if and when he arrives in the United States?
Well, I still kind of feel as though the plan may be to allow him to go before some type of a European court or to continue to stretch this thing out because, as you bring up, there are going to be major problems if they bring Julian Assange here. It's going to put the mainstream media here in a difficult position wherein it will be made obvious that they are theoretically acting against their own best interest. Many of the mainstream media outlets that have remained quiet during the persecution of Julian Assange could, in fact, be charged with the same crimes that he's charged with, and that they shared the same information that he shared. So, as if the Biden administration didn't have enough problems, if they bring Julian Assange here to the United States, they'll probably face some very significant questions, and I would likely think there will be some protests.
Yeah, I mean, that was the point I was going to make to you next. Joe Biden needs this like a hole in the head, right? I mean, the liberals that are his last remaining constituency of support, including the liberal newspapers, the Post, the Times, and so on, they cannot possibly support the prosecution of Julian Assange under the Espionage Act because they actually published his material. And so one would have thought that Biden would have dropped this case by now. Why hasn't he?
This is not a Joe Biden case. This is, in fact, the deep state, or some people just call it the state. This is the eternal state, the people who are always in power. They're upset about it, and they would be perfectly happy if, they're fine if Joe Biden, suffers, if either of the parties suffer, because they're still going to be in power. I think one of the things we're looking at here is that it would be interesting in this particular time period because the Ukraine project, which is a neocon project, is in collapse with what's happening in Avdiivka. Always struggle with that term. The Human Rights Project, which is to go around the world and to claim, that we have the moral high ground all of the time, that's falling apart with the Alexei Navalny death, because as the U.S. screams, "Oh my gosh, poor Navalny," of course, people obviously say, "You're literally involved in a genocide. How can you possibly argue that someone else is involved in some kind of, a crime of moral turpitude based on what you're doing?" And last but not least, certainly the issue of Julian Assange brings up the issue of democracy and of freedom of speech, freedom of the press that the U.S. again tries to use against their enemies. So it would be one more of their fake tropes collapsing in their face.
I was going to ask you about both Ukraine and Gaza. Let's start with Ukraine. The logjam over funding appears to be continuing, and according to one of our guests, Simon in Florida, it now imperils the current Speaker of the House as it imperiled the last one. What's happening on the Ukraine front in the United States?
Well, I think it would have been difficult enough to get funding through prior to everything that's happened in the last several weeks. But I think that two things. Number one, the fact that it is now clear and obvious that there is no universe in which Ukraine is going to defeat the Russian army makes it obvious that any money that's sunk into Ukraine now is, of course, throwing bad money. I would say bad money for good. Let's just say worse money for bad in this particular instance. Additionally, Donald Trump, I think, realizes that this thing's going to collapse, and the Republicans realize that this thing's going to collapse. And I think they realize they'd much prefer it collapse now than after the election. And so it's going to be, I think, nearly impossible to get any money through for the Ukraine project, in that it is in the process of collapsing right now. So I think that that game is over. They're probably going to try to figure out how they can survive the immediate demise of the Nazi regime in Kiev.
Well, of course, Donald Trump said he'd sort it out before he was even inaugurated, but the war might be over before your presidential election is even held. How much of an election issue is this turning out to be in the primaries and as we run towards November?
Well, I think that it has the fallout from the Ukraine debacle has not even begun to to hit American politics, because there's still some, because Ukraine has not completely collapsed. The American people, a large number of the American people, have not realized the gravity of the situation there. But as we see it completely collapse, they'll be in a position where the only option will be to begin some level of negotiations with the Russians, and to negotiate with the Russians acknowledges that the Russians are good faith actors, that they can be talked to. So the more evidence that comes out that the Russians, were willing to talk, from the Tucker Carlson interview, and that now we're in a position where we can talk to the Russians, where we have to talk to the Russians. The whole trope that they were just crazy people who wanted to attack Ukraine and then move on to the English Channel is going to go out the window. And it just opens the door for more questions. I think the Biden administration's in deep and serious hurt. And I don't know if you saw the latest iteration of the Biden brain freeze, but it was so horrific as to create a dynamic where now Kamala Harris is out talking. And now they're saying Kamala Harris, there's all of this press that Kamala Harris is now working to save the campaign and to take them in a different direction. If Kamala Harris is your salvation, it's time to search for a white flag.
What's been the fallout of Tucker Carlson's global record-breaking interview? I don't know the latest figure. The last one I saw was over 200 million viewers. The most viewed political interview of all time by a country mile, by 1,000 country miles. What's the fallout in the US over it?
I think the biggest fallout is probably in Congress, because there were a lot of people out here who watch alternative media, and they already understood what was going on there. However, I think now the pressure from that element of the Republican Party that was opposing for this this neocon project in Ukraine, that element is growing due to this, and they've got more information. I think the people who are opposing continuing with the neocon project now have much more ammunition to argue against it, that now that has created a group of Republicans in the House that are large enough and strong enough that they can block it. That now I don't see how anything that just finished it off. Now they have the horsepower that they need in Congress to ensure that no more money gets thrown away in the Ukraine trash compactor.
Now, Joe Biden has just announced that he's going to veto the latest, fourth, I think it is, attempt to order a ceasefire from the Security Council in New York. This is the Algerian motion that we talked about on the show earlier. Why did he do that? I mean, why not just abstain? He's always telling us, after all, that he's increasingly unhappy about the unhinged behavior of your country's Israeli ally.
Well, it's fairly obvious now that Joe Biden will go along with Bibi Netanyahu, whatever he wants, no matter how disastrous the policies. The history of Joe Biden, if you look at what he has said regarding Israel and Zionism, it is very clear that Joe Biden has always intended on supporting the most extreme elements in the Israeli government, and that while he may, occasionally they'll leak something that Joe Biden was arguing with Benjamin Netanyahu, or he called him some kind of a name. Those little leaks come out for what they're worth. But the reality is, Joe Biden has made it clear that he's going to support Bibi Netanyahu to the end. I do think that the plan that the Zionist leadership in Israel has to attack Hezbollah will be in southern Lebanon will be their demise, because Lebanon is far too powerful for them to go toe to toe with it and not really get clobbered. And at that point, what does the United States do? Do they get involved when the American people do not want another war? So Joe Biden's backed himself and Bibi Netanyahu into a corner. And I can't predict how it will come out, but I do predict that Joe Biden will continue to support Bibi Netanyahu in his suicidal, move to really to destroy Israel on his own.
And finally, Garland, please bring us up to date on the farcical primaries. Trump's already won. He had already won before he began. Is he formally the winner yet? And Joe Biden, having forced everyone else out of the race, has he managed to win against no opponents at all? And where stands Kennedy now in the polling?
Well, right now it is Joe Biden and Trump. That's pretty much it. It's a foregone conclusion. The Democrats, as you probably know, a number of states, they wouldn't even allow another name on the ballot other than Joe Biden. So they've made their decision to go with Biden. But again, we can see that Joe Biden does not have the mental capacity to continue. I mean, I don't even know if this guy's still going to be alive next November, and if he is, if he'll know he's alive. I think to be quite frank, the discussion about the Democratic Party is not so much about Joe Biden being the nominee, but how are they going to manage? What machinations will they use to insert someone else other than Joe Biden? Nikki Haley's an interesting because she's basically saying all the things that the Democrats would say. She's making the arguments that the neocon Democrats would make against Donald Trump. She's attacking him now for not being tough about the death of Alexei Navalny. And I think she's mainly sticking around, hoping that they'll be able to use lawfare to get rid of Donald Trump. And when Trump goes, because of whatever the latest case against him takes him out, that she'll be there to, as they say, you shake the tree and I'll rake the leaves. She's there to rake the leaves in the primaries. But right now, the main case that they wanted to use against Donald Trump in Georgia seems to be unfolding. The other case that they wanted to hurt him with in New York, where he ended up with interest about a $450 million judgment against him, that still has to go to the Supreme Court. And I personally think that the Supreme Court will significantly reduce that, but we shall see. So yeah, right now, to be on the ground in the United States, pretty much universally, everybody says, yeah, it looks like Trump's going to win it. I mean, you just talk to everybody and everybody says, yeah, Trump's going to win it. Only those who hope otherwise, they have their fingers and toes crossed. But in reality, barring some unthinkable black swan event, Donald Trump has this thing done.
Any word on his running mate?
No, the discussion now, there are some people saying, well, maybe Nikki Haley. Well, here's what I'd say. If Donald Trump chose Nikki Haley, he wouldn't live an hour. If the neocons knew that all they had to do was take Donald Trump out and Nikki Haley would become immediately president, he wouldn't live long enough to do the oath of office. But there's a lot of names floating around there. I personally believe myself, due to the fact that there's so many military engagements, my prediction is that Donald Trump will choose somebody with a military background. I don't know that it'll be McGregor or whoever, but I'm suspecting he will choose someone with a military background that will cement his argument that he can address the all of these international conflicts going on, and that he will have someone who understands them enough that he can navigate them to a close. So that's my prediction.
That's a smart piece of speculation. I hope it's Colonel McGregor. If it's not Scott Ritter, Garland Nixon, thank you very much for joining us.